Welcome in to the GoVols247 Podcast alongside Patrick Brown. I'm Ryan Callahan on this edition. We are, as of this recording, a little more than 48 hours away from kickoff of Tennessee and Georgia. The national spotlight will definitely be on the Vols this weekend, 3:30 Eastern Time, Saturday on ABC, College game day in town. It is a big one, a top 15 matchup. According to the Associated Press top 25, Georgia number 6, Tennessee number 15. And we're going to break that all down in this episode, get into the details of this matchup and how Tennessee and Georgia will look and what we maybe expect to see on Saturday in a matchup of kind of unknowns. I was kind of telling someone earlier, this is a lot like the Tennessee-Florida game was for years, where you just didn't know what to expect from either team because it was the first true test for either team. It's been a while since Georgia was in this place on Tennessee's schedule, but they're back there and makes for an intriguing matchup with both teams having plenty of unknowns. But before we get into all that, Patrick, how's everything going? You ready for a big busy game week?
Yeah, aren't they all busy? But yeah, this is obviously a big game. A lot of people are excited about it. Been posting some preview content, and it's an interesting matchup that we'll get into. But it feels like it's kind of there for the taking for Tennessee, but they are going to have to reverse some trends that have not gone their way in the past 4 meetings against Georgia. Obviously, Georgia's won 8 in a row in the series, but kind of just looking at the 4 Heupel matchups, there's some things that Tennessee's going to have to do that they've not done if they're going to get over the hump in this game.
No question. And well, let's start with the news, I guess, to the extent that there is any news. We do have the first version of the availability report for the season for both of these teams that was released Wednesday night. Of course, the SEC mandated injury reports that are released, and they'll be released again Thursday night and Friday night ahead of Saturday's game. So there will be additional updates to these. You know, it was sort of Tennessee's approach. It seemed like a lot of times last year that whatever was on the initial report would kind of stay in a lot of cases unless there was a really fluid situation. Would you say that's accurate, Patrick? I mean, are you looking for possible changes the next couple of days?
There were some changes from one day to the next last year, and I think the availability reports are really more beneficial for the road teams because you know if a guy doesn't travel, then you're going to rule him out Friday night. That's what happened, I think, with Lance Hurd early in that Oklahoma game. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll see. There's still some time for us to learn more about whether these guys are actually going to play. But there were 7 total players on this initial availability report. A few guys ruled out that we were not necessarily shocked by, but obviously Jermod McCoy, cornerback, out for this game. Ricky Gibson also out for this game. That's not a surprise. And then David Hobbs, the defensive tackle, still out. And that one, likely to go beyond next week, even from what I've gathered so far. So we'll see when he starts to work his way back from that injury, but doesn't look like he's particularly close at this point. So he has been ruled out. So that kind of puts all the attention on 3 of the questionable guys in particular. You have running back Hunter Barnes, who's questionable, and then offensive lineman David Sanders Jr., of course, the 5-star freshman tackle, has not played in Tennessee's first 2 games. He is questionable for this game as of Wednesday night. Tyree Weathersby, the defensive lineman, that's a big one to me for Tennessee. I think you need Weathersby back in this game. And then Jackson Moy, the senior defensive tackle, another starter for Tennessee, who was out last week against East Tennessee State, is currently listed as questionable. Patrick, what do you make of that initial availability report, and who are you kind of looking at most closely based on that initial word that we got on those 7 players?
Yeah, it's I'm not really surprised that those 3 guys were listed as questionable. I'm a little skeptical on Sanders and Moy. Listening to, I don't know if he meant to do this, but after practice on Tuesday, Sam Pendleton was asked about David Sanders and Tennessee starting center, kind of made it sound like he was still not really involved in practice, just the way that he sort of answered a question saying that Sanders has done a good job staying engaged from afar were the exact words. So certainly that could change. But the nature of his injury is what it is. It's probably it's clearly been more significant than just a minor deal because it's cost him 2 games and it might cost him a third. So it's one that Tennessee needs to be cautious with. So we'll see if he gets. I would think he's going to continue to be questionable up until game day, but that just means he could get demoted or upgraded to on Thursday night here in a few hours. So That's just how that goes. With Moy, obviously he's dealing with an elbow injury. My question is, how effective can he be at his position if that part of his body is not 100% or not effective? That's gonna. I don't question his pain tolerance. I think he's probably a pretty tough dude, but it's just a matter of are you going to be effective enough for that? So, and we'll see about Weathersby. Again, I think I said Monday that was probably more precautionary that he was not playing last week, but injuries, as we've seen already, can be a little finicky. So we'll have to see if anybody gets upgraded, downgraded, or changes anything tonight. I should point out on the Georgia side of it, they've got a couple offensive linemen that are that are going to be sort of watching really the right side of their starting offensive line. Juan Gaston was their starting right guard to open the season. Ernest Green was their starting right tackle to open the season. They both did not play last week. I think they got hurt against Marshall in the first game. And so they've had a few different guys at each of those two positions, but I believe Green was listed as probable. So that looks like he might be back, and Gaston was listed as questionable. Jordan Hill on our Georgia site has said that in doing some stuff with him this week, he's made it sound like Green probably will play and Gaston probably will not. So Tennessee could be facing a couple of familiar faces at that right guard spot from a recruiting standpoint. I think Dontrell Glover is a freshman that's in that mix, and then Daniel Calhoun is another one of those guys. But they've played about 4 or 5 different guys at right guard, including Gaston. So we'll see if there's any more updates from either side on Thursday night and into Friday as we get closer to game day.
Yeah, that's definitely noteworthy, Patrick. There's some questions about Georgia's offensive line, much like there were about Tennessee's going into this season. They've run the ball a bit better than they did last year, but they also haven't faced an SEC opponent. But these first 2 games, they have made progress in that area. So we'll see if those guys are back. But yet, as far as Tennessee's concerned, I definitely, it doesn't seem ideal that Tennessee has a couple of its defensive linemen in the 2 deep who are questionable for this game, and especially with Jackson Moy's status being very much up in the air. That seems less than ideal for a game like this. It's such a line of scrimmage test for Tennessee. If Tennessee is forced to play without one or both of those guys, Patrick, how much of a setback would that be with David Hobbs already out at defensive tackle?
Well, it would be a setback, and I think Tennessee's defensive line has played fine without those guys. I mean, really, they've done it the first 2 games because Moy only played 3 snaps before hurting his arm. So that is. It's not ideal. I don't really worry too much about Dominic Bailey, and I don't even really worry about that defensive end spot, whether it is Weathersby or Tyree West or both. If Weathersby is playing, certainly West. If Tyree Weathersby is not playing, I have to specify which Tyree it is. If Weathersby is out, then certainly that bumps Marion Dye up a couple of rungs, but he's certainly an impressive looking freshman. But it's just those other kind of guys like, behind Eason and Dominic Bailey. So that is, it's not ideal. And I think Georgia's going to want to try to run the football. Their offensive line, they've run it okay the first 2 games. It's hard to really tell much because of the opponents. They should run the ball against Marshall and Austin Peay. But as Dominic Bailey said earlier this week, Georgia's offensive line is always going to be pretty good. They're always going to be pretty physical. I think Georgia's going to want to run the football. That's a great way to take a crowd out of a game, is to run the football effectively. It's a great way to take pressure off your quarterback, who's, in a passing game that hasn't exactly lit the world on fire the first 2 games. So, Georgia didn't run the football well last season, but I could see them coming out and trying to be intentional about it and trying to establish the line of scrimmage early. So certainly if you're Tennessee, you would want to have your full strength of your defensive line, but you're not, you might not have that. So you've got to go with who you have, and they're going to need some guys to step up there. And with Sanders on the offensive line, I think it's a little bit less of a concern just because the group they played have played so well. Now, again, they haven't faced the defensive line the caliber of Georgia. And I don't think this Georgia defensive line has, the Jalen Carters or Jordan Davises or some of the other guys that they've run through that program. But it's kind of, it's a typical Georgia defensive line where they've got big guys. I think they're playing a pretty good rotation across the front. So those guys are rolling in pretty fresh. And they got some big guys in the middle and some strong, effective players on the outside. And they're really good at linebacker too. So even if those defensive linemen aren't racking up a bunch of stats, they're freeing things up for those linebackers to roam and wreak havoc and make a lot of plays. So this is going to be a line of scrimmage game, like you said, Ryan, and certainly Tennessee's missing some bodies there. But I think their offensive line has played pretty well. And I think they have a sort of a chip on their shoulder to continue that in this matchup. And certainly the defensive line, they had a couple games to sort of get those young guys, and Nathan Robinson's, Ethan Utley's, to get them adjusted a little bit. Now they've got to sort of step up their game for the step into SEC play.
Yeah, that's the interesting part of this matchup. Tennessee has struggled to consistently run the ball a little bit against Georgia. They had the long run by Jalen Wright on the first play from scrimmage a couple years ago, and from that point forward, didn't get a whole lot going offensively. Last year, had some success in the first half at Georgia, moving the ball and scoring some points. Second half kind of slowed down. So it's been a test. Tennessee has yet to score more than 17 points against Georgia under Josh Heupel. And but at the same time, they've been playing pretty well up front, even without David Sanders. So this will be an interesting matchup. And let's start there, Patrick. What do you make of this matchup for Tennessee's offense as we break down sort of where these two teams are? There's we see this all the time with lots of teams, but it seems like there's a little bit of hand wringing among the Georgia fan base about sort of how they've looked so far this season. But Tennessee, on the offensive side, I think it's gone the opposite way. There was plenty of concern about that side of the ball, but the offense has looked pretty good so far. Obviously, a much tougher test and a big step up in competition this week. What do you make of this matchup for Tennessee's offense? Kind of touched on the offensive line a little bit, but for Joey Aguilar, for the wide receivers, for the running backs, for that whole unit, how do you think they match up with Georgia?
It's sort of an existential question, right? I mean, it's Tennessee has scored points on everybody under Josh Heupel, except this one team. So that begs the question: what has Georgia done that's held Tennessee in check so well? And I think it's twofold. Certainly, they've had a lot of talent. I think that's definitely the case, and I think you have to start there, especially those early kind of teams. The 21, 22, and 23 Georgia teams were, I think, on another level. I think NIL and the current sort of changes to college football maybe leveled the playing field a little bit. I'm not sure the raw difference in terms of the 24/7 sports talent composite of where these teams are, but that's certainly another, that has to be accounted for in this game. But I think just overall, Tennessee's offense, they've not been able to run the ball, as you said. They've not been able to win on the outside. They haven't been able to generate big plays for various reasons, and they haven't been able to run the ball. So, or protect the passer. That's been the biggest issue. They've not won on the line of scrimmage on either side of this game in the past 4 seasons. You kind of touched on it there, but I broke this down a little bit this week. You look at the leading rushers that Tennessee's had in this matchup. In the 21 game, it was Jabari Small. He had 49 yards on 4 yards carry. Jalen Wright had 69 yards in 2022, but needed 21 carries. So that was around 3 yards per carry. Jalen Wright had 75 on one play and then 15 on his other 8 carries. So that was another case of not getting the job done. So the running success that Tennessee's had in this game has been on one play with Jalen Wright's long touchdown, and then Dylan Sampson last season had 101 yards on 19 carries. They ran the ball moderately effectively last season, but I think this is a game where Tennessee's going to have to win on the offensive line. They're going to have to be able to, as Sam Pendleton put it this week, move people off the ball against their will. These guys at Georgia are a lot harder to move than the other guys. You have to move those guys up front, and then also get a hat on those linebackers: Braylon Wilson, C.J. Allen, Chris Cole. Those guys are really athletic, kind of heat-seeking missiles that find the football and make plays. So they've got to keep those guys out of the gaps. And when Tennessee's running backs are able to get to the second level, they've got to make some guys miss. So Tennessee's got to be able to run the ball first and foremost. They also have to be able to protect the passer. In this game, Georgia's run up, I think, 18 sacks over these last 4 meetings. I think they had 6 in a piece in the first 2 games against Hendon Hooker. I think Milton played some of that 21 game as well. And then they had 5 of Nico last season. So the pass protection's got to get better too. And I think that has sort of also stunted the performance of the passing game in this matchup. Tennessee's not been able to get open on the outside for some of those downfield shots. I think I was looking at some of the Pro Football Focus numbers over the past 4 meetings. I think Tennessee's like 4 of 21 on pass attempts over 20 yards downfield against Georgia. So, and I don't think they hit any last season. Their longest plays have been 17 yards, 21 yards. I think they had a late 28-yarder in the 2022 game. So they've just not hit the big plays since that 21 game where Cedric Tillman had 10 catches for 200 yards. And so they've not been able to hit the big plays, not been able to run the ball. And, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? I mean, that's kind of where we're at with Tennessee. They've just not been able to do the things they do against everybody else. So what belief is there that it could be different? Well, I think Tennessee's offensive line has played really well through 2 games. I think they've got a really good attitude of that group. They have been really physical, as Sam Pendleton talked about. I think that shows up when you watch what they've done. Can they maintain that? They've also kept Joey Aguilar pretty clean. I think Tennessee's drawn up some max protect plays that have helped a little bit too to take some of those downfield shots. I think Tennessee tried some of those last season, and maybe Nico didn't pull the trigger. Maybe the protection still broke down. We've seen them do that a couple times in these games where they sort of do a play action, 2-man route, 3-man route to try to get something downfield. I think you could see that in this game as Tennessee tries to maybe isolate a one-on-one matchup outside with a Mike Matthews or a Chris Brazel or even a Braylon Staley. That's one way to generate those big plays, but you still got to A, protect, B, make the throw, and C, make the catch. I don't think Tennessee's receivers have made enough contested plays in this matchup too. So it's going to take all hands on deck, right? I mean, everybody's got to sort of chip in. Hear Josh Heupel say all 11 all the time. So this is one of those games where, Georgia's not going to make mistakes, right? They're not going to get out of position. They're well coached. And even if they do get out of position, they're athletic and talented enough to kind of recover too. So Tennessee's going to have to make some plays. They've not made plays. They've not been able to extend drives on third down. So it's going to take everybody stepping up and sort of reversing, like I mentioned, all of these trends that I just listed out that they've not been able to do against this Georgia defense in the past 4 meetings.
Wanted to touch on Georgia's defense quickly. What we got from Jordan Hill for our Behind Enemy Lines feature earlier this week that you should go check out on GoVols247.com if you have not already. I asked him about how good he thinks this Georgia defense is and what he would say the strength of it is. In part, he said, my read on this defense is that it's better than last year's, but not to the level of the 2021-22 defenses. But he thinks the defensive line is, he said, quote, better positioned to shine. He says they have pretty significant depth up front. And he says their biggest concern on defense right now is strong safety. Now, obviously, we can't tell a whole lot about them because they've played Marshall and Austin Peay. But from that description and from what we know about Georgia overall, is there more reason on Georgia's side at all to expect this to be a more favorable matchup for Tennessee? Or I guess if there's going to be a difference in results this time, is it going to be simply because Tennessee's better equipped to take down Georgia, or do we think there's been any erosion at all of Georgia's advantage that they've had in terms of talent on the defensive side of the ball for so many years over pretty much everyone else in the SEC?
No, I think it's going to take Tennessee moving the needle. I think they're the side that has to play better, block better, execute better, all of those things. Because like Jordan has said, and like I think we all kind of know, I mean, Georgia's defense is Georgia's defense. They're still going to be pretty good. I know they might not have the stars maybe that some had, some that they've had in the past. But everybody kind of thought their talent level was maybe down a little bit last season. They still had 13 NFL draft picks. So
yeah,
they're obviously still got a lot of blue chippers rolling through there, and guys sort of, like I said, they're rotating a lot on the defensive line. I think they play 3 or 4 linebackers. They have some guys that will shift from linebacker and rush off the edge. They've been really aggressive too. I think that's something else I didn't mention is that Georgia's been aggressive with its blitzing in all 4 of these matchups. So that their sort of game plan is to challenge Tennessee on the outside, control the line of scrimmage with their defensive line, defend the run game with that group and the linebackers being able to sort of survive in 6-man boxes. And then, you get Tennessee in some third and long situations, you're able to throw some blitz packages at them and throw off their protection. And while still playing aggressive on the outside, saying, okay, we're going to challenge you. We're going to man up. You're going to have to get open and create separation and make contested catches. And Tennessee's just not been able to do that. So it's going to take Tennessee, I think, elevating its play both on the line of scrimmage and at wide receiver. I haven't touched too much on Joey Aguilar, but I think he's got to obviously play really well too. He's got to see the field and he's got to make, his accuracy's got to be really on point because, the way Georgia's defends on the outside, if you're throwing it a little bit behind or on a guy's back shoulder, that pass is probably going to get broken up. Braylon Staley talked this week about how, you can't expect many penalties, any PIs and holdings. You're not gonna be able to expect that. He said that they do a good job of going against press coverage, I should say, in practice, but it'll be a different level in Tennessee. I think some of those receivers are going to have to, they're just going to have to play through contact and make plays through contact for Tennessee to sort of elevate it. But Georgia is not going to change what it is. They're not going to reinvent the wheel, regardless of who the personnel is. The personnel is going to be good. The coaching is going to be good. Obviously, Kirby Smart's one of the best defensive minds in the game. So I think it's up to Tennessee to execute better, make more plays. They got to throw and catch and block better because it just hasn't gone well in this matchup. So they're the ones that I think the onus is on them to reverse the trends and do some of these things that they haven't done in this matchup for the outcome to change.
Yeah, you went exactly where I was going next. How this looks for Joey Aguilar and those wide receivers. It's obviously a big test for Aguilar to finally to show what he can do against top level competition. The only comparable test really that he's had during his college career is probably playing against Clemson a couple years ago. That was 2 years ago, I believe, right?
I
Not
think it was
last year.
last season.
Oh, last year. Okay, so last year against Clemson. So that was a good Clemson team. So he has faced a good test at least from a team like that. But this will be obviously a different level from most of the opponents he's faced in his college career. So this will be his first really big test in the SEC, obviously, and to have those wide receivers go against this Georgia secondary, I think kind of an underrated storyline as you kind of touched on. Georgia's probably going to throw a lot of press coverage at Tennessee. How will those young guys handle it? We've seen some good things from Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley, and even Chris Brazzell has played a bit better, although the Vols have had some troubles with drops. They're ranked toward the bottom of the country in drop rate. That's something they need to clean up in this game, it seems like. But it's going to be a big test, and there's no way to know for sure how it's going to play out. What you have any sense on? Everybody's kind of been waiting for the other shoe to drop with Joey Aguilar. We haven't seen an interception yet. Is this the game where we see some of his maybe risk-taking tendencies show back up again and maybe lead to a turnover that costs Tennessee? Or do you think Tennessee has maybe helped him curb some of those tendencies and take better care of the ball?
I think they have helped him take better care of the ball. They've protected him really well, and I think they've run the ball well. That's the two best things a quarterback can have is a run game that doesn't have you in 2nd and 10 and 3rd and 9 all day. I think that helps. And then also, they've protected him really well with what they've done up front. So if those things can continue, his level of play can continue as well. He also did play North Carolina at App State. That was 2 years ago. I think that was his first start for the Mountaineers, actually. And he was opposite Drake May in that game and played pretty well. I think Appalachian State, they lose that game in overtime, I think.
Yeah.
So that, he has faced some power conference, competition before, but this is a game where he's going to have to make some big plays and some big moments. He's going to have to take care of the football, like you said. But I think he's just playing really well right now. I don't think he's going to get too amped up or psyched out he's not going to be, oh my gosh, I'm playing Georgia. I don't think he's going to do any of that because by all accounts, he's very composed. He's 24 years old. He's seen some things. He's been around. Like he's not going to get fazed by this defense. And that could change if he's hit early in the game. Certainly, we've seen that happen before in games where if you're able to, I don't want to say send a message early, but if you're able to get some hits in on him early, you can affect how a quarterback plays. I think Tennessee needs to do that early with Gunnar Stockton potentially. If you can rattle him early, that's going to be to your advantage on the flip side. But it'll be different. I'll be interested to see. Like I said, Georgia was. Tennessee got out to a 10-0 lead, and I think Georgia just cranked up the heat on Nico. They said, we're going to come after this young quarterback. We're not going to sit back there. Are they going to do that against Aguilar? He's an older guy. Yeah, he's not necessarily faced this level of competition, but he's also probably maybe not going to get his phased or as rattled. So it'll be interesting to see if Tennessee is able to play well enough, if Aguilar is able to make some plays early in the game that if they're able to punish some blitzes, maybe you can get them out of that mode. So, but Aguilar, I think he's not going to be. I don't think he's going to be wowed or like I said, he's played at Clemson. He's played it, got his first game at Neyland out of the way. I think he's not going to be too nervous or too anxious or too rattled by what he sees on the other side of the football, and they just need him to go kind of continue what he's been doing.
Yeah, he's been pretty accurate on down the field throws. That's a big storyline in this game. If he can keep that up, that will give Tennessee an element of the offense it's not been able to rely on in this matchup very much the past couple of years. I think the quarterbacks are an interesting storyline on both sides, including Gunnar Stockton. We'll talk about him and how Tennessee's defense matches up with Georgia after this quick timeout. Welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Ryan Callahan, joined by Patrick Brown on this edition, previewing Tennessee's big showdown with Georgia on Saturday at Neyland Stadium. It's the SEC opener for both teams. Kickoff at 3:30 Eastern Time, Saturday on ABC. The Vols get the big time ABC crew, right? You get Herb Street and that gang. So it should be a fun one.
Chris
College
Fowler,
game day.
yeah.
Chris Fowler, yep. And so yeah, college game day in town. And Tennessee in the national spotlight with one of the biggest games certainly of the weekend, and a big opportunity for the Vols to maybe establish themselves as a a serious college football playoff contender already, I think, on the fringe of that conversation after a pretty solid 2-0 start, but could put themselves right in the mix nationally with a win against Georgia. Before we move on, I did want to remind everyone, if you have not given us a rating or a review in a while, even if you've done one in the past, please go do that anywhere you get your GoVols247 podcast. We'd greatly appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe as well if you don't already do that, so that these podcasts continue to show up in your feed every time we post them. We have at least 3 a week during the season and a couple per week most of the time year round. So plenty of podcasts for you to keep track of, and you want to make sure you're subscribed so you get the next edition, which will be a post-game edition probably sometime Saturday night. And then if you are not already on the site at GoVols247.com, there's certainly no better time to join than Tennessee Georgia Week. You can sign up right now for $1 for your first month to go check out all of our content, and there is plenty of it, including some recruiting stuff. Tennessee with a big recruiting weekend that we'll get into in just a minute, but lots of good stuff. Patrick breaking down this matchup with multiple pieces there, and his weekly X's and O's feature. Lots of good stuff behind that VIP paywall. So you want to be sure to join to get access to all of that and more at GoVols247.com. Patrick touched on it before the break, but Gunnar Stockton is obviously a bit of an unknown still on some level, to some degree, going into this game. He played in the college football playoff last year, got thrown into the SEC championship game last year, so he's not completely untested. But this is his first year as a full-time starter, and it feels like we're still learning a little bit more about him. Last week against Austin Peay, that seemed like there were some Georgia fans really not sure about what they were seeing from him. They didn't stretch the field a whole lot. The efficiency was there in the past game, just not a whole lot stretching the field and things like that. This will be a big test for him in his first true road game, as much as anything. Maybe makes this interesting and a bigger challenge for him going on the road to play in a very hostile environment like Neyland Stadium will be on Saturday. And then Tennessee's got to show that its pass rush is where it needs to be going into a game like this. And they've also got to be able to contain Stockton's running ability. He's a better runner than Carson Beck. So what do you make of that whole dynamic, Patrick, including how a Tennessee defensive line that's a bit banged up may fare against Georgia's offensive line in terms of both stopping the run and getting after the quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a group effort to stop the run first and foremost. But Tennessee's got to get some more of a pass rush in this game. I think they've only had 3 sacks in the past 4 meetings with Georgia, kind of continuing all those trends that have shown why this game has gone the way it's gone. So I think this is a huge game for Josh Josephs. This is a money-making opportunity for Josh Josephs. He'll be going up against a couple of Georgia offensive tackles. Monroe Freeling, I think, is at left tackle now. I think he was a former 5-star. They probably all are former 5-stars for Georgia at this point.
Just about.
But then we'll see. Ernest Green. But those guys have played some, so you're not getting. Green's probably been at least starting a little bit for a couple seasons now. I think Freeling started maybe late last season. So, but this is a game Josephs has got to show up. He's got to make his presence felt early and often. He's Tennessee's best pass rusher. He's their best game breaker up front. So they need him to make an impact on this game. And I had the numbers not in front of me right now, but Georgia's been really good on third down in this matchup over the past 4 seasons. I think their third down percentage is it's over 55%. It's hard to live on defense if you can't get off the field. So I think too many times we've seen a Georgia quarterback either scramble for a first down on third down in this game, or have all day to throw and find somebody open. This is a big game for Tennessee's defensive line. I think Josephs has to show up. The interior guys have to hold up too. This is a big game for Bryson Eason and Dominic Bailey. Those guys have to muddy things up on those between the tackle runs. I like Tennessee's linebackers and their ability to defend the run in this game with Arion Carter, Jeremiah Thielander, Edwin Spillman. I think those guys have a good combination of athleticism and a nose for the football to see it and go get it. So, but Stockton, this is his first SEC road start, but kind of like Aguilar, he's an older guy. I mean, he's been around. He's a redshirt junior, so and an older guy. So I don't think he's going to get overly. I don't think his eyes are going to glaze over when he walks into the setting and hears the noise. That said, the noise still can impact just the basic ability to communicate, which is interesting because Georgia's come into this game. The past 2 seasons have been late in the season. I think that 21 game. I think Tennessee fans were hopeful but not expectant. In the 23 game, right? I think that team, had they just gotten beaten by Missouri? They just got blown out. So there probably wasn't a whole lot of hope going into that game. Now it's early in the season. Hope is springing eternal for Tennessee fans. So they're going to be probably a few notches louder than they have been. And Georgia lost 2 games on the road last season. Let's remember that. They went and played great at Texas. But their other 2 losses, they were kind of blitzed early against Alabama and then lost at Ole Miss too.
And it's Checker Neyland.
Right. So, I mean, it's going to be a different scene, I think, than maybe Georgia's run into the previous 2 times it's won here in this sort of Heupel versus Kirby era. So I think that could be an advantage to Tennessee if you're just able to, even if you're able to get 3 or 4 false start penalties or delay games or make Georgia burn timeouts. I mean, those things matter. They can impact a game like that. So, but I think Tennessee's got to stop the run, and they've got to get Gunnar Stockton throwing the football. They've got to make him beat them as a passer. I think that's maybe the big question that maybe Georgia fans have. It's certainly a question I have of Stockton is, can Georgia throw the ball at all down the field? Looking at their numbers on PFF, I think Stockton's only attempted 10 passes of more than 10 yards down the field. They're doing a lot of stuff short, a lot of stuff behind the line. If you've got a guy like Zachariah Branch, that's not a bad idea. But it's going to be hard to continue that and beat Tennessee with a lot of dinking and dunking. So, and Georgia's receivers have done a good job with Yak and making things happen after the catch. But I think you've got to stop the run if you're Tennessee. And you've got to get off the field on third down. That's the other big thing. And on third down, when you're going after Stockton, I think you have to be aggressive. I don't think you can sit back. I think Tennessee did that too much last season. But you can't be over aggressive and have somebody run out of a lane or you leave a escape avenue for Stockton to get out and scramble, or maybe he gets out of the pocket and extends a play, makes a throw on the run. I think you've got to be aggressive, but you've got to be under control when you do it. So those are the things I think Tennessee's got to do if they're going to hold up Gunnar Stockton and sort of finally shut down a Georgia quarterback, which they've not done in a while either.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the third downs. It seemed like Carson Beck could not miss on third down in the second half of that game last year in Athens. A couple questions about the passing game or a couple elements of the passing game I wanted to touch on with you real quick. The cornerback situation for Tennessee, obviously noteworthy that, we're not surprised that Jermod McCoy and Ricky Gibson are out for this game, but that's still a big deal that the 2 guys you thought were going to be your starting corners going into this year, juniors that both NFL draft prospects, McCoy, a possible first-round pick. We'll see about that. But to not have those guys out there, still a setback for Tennessee, but through 2 games against non-SEC opponents, they played pretty well, it seems, with Colton Hood and Ty Redmond carrying most of the load there. How do you see those guys faring against Georgia in this matchup? And maybe more importantly, although Georgia's got some receivers that scare you. You mentioned Zachariah Branch in particular. He had a good season opener against Marshall a couple weeks ago. But the tight end has really cost Tennessee in the passing game in this matchup in particular. And they obviously have always done a good job of getting the ball to the tight end and under Kirby Smart, and even going back to the Mark Richt era, they've had some good tight ends that they've gotten involved. How confident should Tennessee be that it can do something better than it did last year, where Oscar Delp took advantage of some favorable matchups and made some good plays, and Carson Beck made some great throws to find him. How confident should Tennessee be that it can slow down the tight end this time around, and that those corners can hold up against Georgia's wide receivers?
I probably feel better if I'm Tennessee about the corners, because I think those guys have played pretty good man coverage. My biggest concerns in this game would be that you, again, struggle against the tight ends. Oscar Delp is still there, unfortunately for Tennessee. So is Lawson Lucky. I think the 3 guys, the 3 top tight ends Georgia had last season had 10 catches for 130 yards in this game. Delp had 2 touchdowns. And that's another reason where Tennessee's got to be able to stop the run, because if Georgia's running the football well, that sets up their play action where they can manipulate the eyes of the safeties and the linebackers, right? That's where you can exploit the middle of the field. If you've got a linebacker who's looking in the backfield, you can slip out a tight end behind him, right? And in front of the safeties. That's we see Tennessee do that too. That Tennessee's got to figure that out over the middle of the field, but I think they've got to stop the run too. To sort of negate that advantage that Georgia could create. Like I said, the other concern for Tennessee would be, honestly, Georgia throws a bubble screen and Zachariah Branch turns it into a house call. I think he's a dynamic, explosive athlete. Never quite put it together, I think, as a wide receiver at USC, which is odd to say given that, Lincoln Riley's offenses out there have been typically pretty good, at least had pretty good quarterback play. that he wasn't able to produce more there, but he's still a guy that is a home run threat anytime he gets his hand on the football. They've got a couple other big targets there. And Noah Thomas, who came over from Texas A&M. I think he caught a touchdown against Tennessee a couple of years ago when the Aggies played up here. But a 6'5" power forward, Cedric Tillman kind of guy that could be a tough matchup for Hood or Redmond just because of their size. Colby Young is another guy that's big. I think 6'4". He was going to be their big transfer addition last season. I think was arrested, had some off the field stuff that got resolved this offseason. So he's back. He's had a productive start. But the way the Hood and Redmond are playing, I'd take my chances with those guys. I'd be more concerned about Tennessee's linebackers and safeties just covering the middle of the field because that's just where Tennessee has struggled the most. So I'd throw Jalen McMurray in there too because he's going to be involved, and he's another guy that's sort of like the safeties, like the linebackers, got some run game responsibilities, right? It's kind of like Willie Martinez said last week. If you're a cornerback and you're playing man coverage, your job's easy. Go cover that guy. with the linebackers and other positions, you've got other responsibilities and keys you've got to read. So that's where Georgia, with their play calling, with Mike Bobo, I feel like too many times in this game, Georgia's just had sort of Tennessee, I don't want to say on skates, but guessing almost. So like they don't know what's coming. So I think Tennessee's got to sort of figure that out and maybe not get itself into that situation again. And even when it's not been the case, Georgia's had guys make plays. Remember this game 2 years ago, Dylan Bell, he made it seemed like he made 4 or 5 contested catches, all of them on third down. That were so big in that game. So, I feel okay about Hood and Redmond just because of how they've shown and their attitudes. I think Tennessee's confident in them too. But you need to see more from the linebackers, and can they can one of those guys get a hand on the football? Can they not get with their eyes caught in the backfield and let somebody open? That would be a concern for me going into this one.
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing how Tennessee attacks Georgia in this game because we've seen. They had 5 sacks against Syracuse in the season opener, but some of that was accomplished through blitzing. We've seen Joshua Joseph make some nice plays in both games. He's kind of the one guy they've really been able to count on from a pure pass rush perspective without blitzing. So how much do they blitz those linebackers? How much of a pass rush can they get with a 4-man rush? And Tyree Weathersby, his availability could be a big factor in that, obviously playing a huge role for this team so far this season with Dominic Bailey having to play more snaps inside. So what does Tim Banks do? Does he sit back and kind of trust Tennessee's pass rush to get there, or does he bring some pressure and risk, maybe making it even easier for Georgia's tight ends to continue what they have done against Tennessee in recent years so often? So it'll be a fun chess match to watch Saturday between Mike Bobo, Tim Banks, and even the other side of the ball, because this is I think a more competitive matchup than it has been in some of these recent matchups in this series, where Georgia's obviously won the last 8 meetings, all by double digits, I believe, during that stretch. Last year ended up being a 14-point loss for Tennessee. So, yeah, I think all by double figures. So Tennessee hoping to keep this one closer. And the line suggests it's going to be closer. I think still 3.5 or somewhere around there, right, Patrick? Last time I checked. So
yeah.
The Vegas line, the odds makers out there still see this being a close game. A lot of fans do. It should be a fun one, and it's going to make for a pretty fun atmosphere that Tennessee is going to try to certainly take advantage of in terms of recruiting. Lots of big names coming in for this one. We'll have a complete preview on GoVols247, but just some of the big names we know about right now. Cooper Witten, the 5-star linebacker from Texas, of course, who's the son of Jason Witten, the former Vols star. That's obviously a huge visit anytime he's back in town. He was in town in late May and early June for the Big Orange barbecue event they had, and then watched during Tennessee's first camp of the year. And games like this also bring in some out-of-state big names a lot of times, and that's certainly the case for this one. Not guys that don't have ties to Tennessee. You kind of see Tennessee make the most of these types of weekends and try to get more in the mix for some big-time players that they hadn't previously been connected to. Kennedy Brown definitely fits that description. 5-star offensive tackle from Texas, number 1 player in the country in the 24/7 Sports Composite. He is scheduled to make it in to Tennessee this weekend. So one of those visits that we'll have to see if Tennessee can kind of parlay that into being more of a contender for him going forward, but still pretty early in his recruitment. Big opportunity for the Vols to try to make an impression on a player of his caliber. Obviously, most of Tennessee's commitments will be back in town, including Tristan Keys, the 5-star wide receiver, coming off his commitment to the Vols just a few weeks ago. Faison Brandon expected to be back in town as well, the 5-star quarterback. So most of Tennessee's class will be in town, and a lot of their top in-state targets early on in the 2027 class, including Amari Sanders, the 4-star, listed as a linebacker, could be an edge, could be a safety, just kind of a defensive athlete from Franklin Road Academy in Nashville. He'll be back in town for this one. Lawrence Britt, the wide receiver kind of athlete out of Memphis, could play multiple positions, but mostly being recruited as a wide receiver. He'll be back in town for this one. Teammates at Westview High School in Martin, Asa Barnes and Miles Brown, that Tennessee offered back in June. Those are guys Tennessee's recruiting pretty hard early on. So a lot of important in-state targets that the Vols are heavily involved with. Just a bunch of big names, highly ranked players at almost every position. So we'll have a complete preview of that on GoVols247 here shortly, around the time this podcast is recorded. Should be up not long after that, but bunch of names, and Tennessee's certainly got a big opportunity to take advantage of this big stage that this game provides, and put on a good show with what obviously should be a pretty electric environment with Checker Neyland and College Game Day in town and everything that comes with that. And it from a recruiting perspective, it should be a win for Tennessee, no matter what the outcome on the field, but especially if you could pull off the upset, as we saw with the Alabama game, the last two times the Vols hosted Alabama in 2022 and last year. They certainly made the most of those games, and those post-game scenes made for really memorable experiences for all those players in attendance. So win or lose, Tennessee will have a good weekend, and the atmosphere alone will make it a successful weekend from a recruiting standpoint. But certainly if Tennessee can put things together on the field and pull the, I guess what would still be considered a mild upset, could make for a pretty special weekend for Tennessee that could have some really long-lasting effects in recruiting as we look back on these types of games every year and see months later, how many guys did Tennessee sign in that 2023 or 2024 class that you look back and said, oh, he was at the Alabama game in 2022. Mike Matthews, for instance, was at that 2022 game, ends up signing with the Vols a little more than a year later. So definitely a lot of big names that we'll be tracking throughout the weekend, and we'll have plenty of recruiting updates in addition to covering Saturday's game at GoVols247.com. Patrick, anything else we should add before we get out of here?
Yeah, so what you're saying is if Tennessee wins, they're going to get all these guys, right? They're going to get
immediately, just one after the other.
And if they lose, they're all going somewhere else. They're all going to Georgia, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I used to get that question all the time because, Tennessee would host these games and fans would kind of ask, 4, 5, 6 years ago, especially when the program was not at the level it is now, why do you want to bring in guys for the Georgia game? And it's like, even if it's 41-10, you're not going to have a bad time at a game like this. And a couple of years ago, it ended up being not a very close game. But I mean, how many players came away saying, man, that place was so loud when Jalen Wright scored that touchdown the first play from scrimmage? I mean, that place came unglued. And just that one moment stuck with players enough. I mean, sure, it would have been nicer to make that more of a game and stay in it till the fourth quarter at least and be more competitive. But that moment and just the pregame atmosphere gave players a great experience. So, yeah, win or lose, I think Tennessee's going to come out okay this weekend. But, yeah, certainly a win would not do anything to hurt their chances of landing some big-time targets that are in town this weekend. And again, pretty much top-level talent at every position for this game. So, lots to keep track of. A couple of Tennessee's top receiver targets in the 2027 class. I mentioned in-state guys, Keyshawn Bowman from Brentwood Academy, the 5-star Oregon commitment, committed to Oregon just a little more than a month ago, but Tennessee's still heavily involved there, and Tennessee getting him back on campus, along with Dakota Garant, a big-time wide receiver, I think also a 5-star in the 24/7 Sports Composite out of the state of Michigan. So big opportunity for Tennessee this weekend, and that's both on the field and in recruiting. So we'll have full coverage of all that throughout the weekend, and of course, coverage leading up to Saturday's game, including additional injury updates Thursday night and Friday night when that availability report comes out. We'll have all the details on that, and our picks coming up on Friday, bold predictions. We'll have a complete analysis of everything you need to know going into Saturday's game, and then, of course, coverage of the game on Saturday and throughout the weekend as well. With that being said, I think that'll do it for this edition of the GoVols247 Podcast. For Patrick Brown, I'm Ryan Callahan. We'll talk to you guys this weekend. Hope everyone enjoys the game. Should be a fun one at Neyland Stadium on Saturday between Tennessee and Georgia.